This video is about the germ theory or terrain theory, Antoine Bechamp versus Louis Pasteur. We can talk about the foundations of modern microbiology through the lens of Chinese medicine. First, I'd like to start with some questions. Somebody drinks a glass of bacteria and nothing happens. Someone else drinks the same glass of bacteria and they become ill. In kindergartens or schools, children catch diseases from each other. What is the explanation? What is behind them? I believe it is susceptibility. When we are tired and exhausted, our mitochondria don't work properly, they don't make enough energy, and our metabolism slows down. We start to make waste, and this waste needs to be cleaned up, digested. This process is called autophagy, and this is the sterile inflammatory process which cleans up this metabolic waste and also makes some energy. And this sterile inflammation is supposed to attract infections. This slide shows how we get exhausted. So on the left hand side, when mitochondria are strong, the electromagnetic field in the cell is also strong. So the communication, cooperation and coordination in the cell and in between cells is also strong. This is strong qi. When mitochondria go down, this electromagnetic field also becomes weak. So the cooperation, coordination and communication goes down and we start making waste. This waste needs to be digested, as I said, and this digestive process is called autophagy or sterile inflammation. This sterile inflammation generates histamine, and this histamine may be the signal for bacteria to come and cause infection. Sometimes this histamine process is called mast cell activation syndrome and implies an elevated inflammatory level. Bechamp also mentioned microzyma, which he thought were bacteria and nothing else but a simple way of communication among cells, and they were also called exosomes. Bechamp also theorized that this microzyma may change their shape and structure, and it was said to be rectified and verified by Rife dark field microscopy. So why do infections come? Do they come and help us to digest waste? It may be especially true for opportunistic pathogens because they start from colonization, they live on the skin, for example, and they become a source of infection when they start to interact with our body. So what is the possible solution? Is it only to cool this sterile inflammation or just kill the bacteria despite having more bacteria in our body than human cells? Or can we do perhaps something more? I believe, and this is what Chinese medicine does, is as follows. They repair mitochondria, they reduce inflammation. This is the cooling process, the same as our Western antibiotics do. They also start digesting the waste with autophagy. And they also repair membrane capacitance. We can talk about this later. So Western medications usually cool this inflammation, but they do nothing else. We are talking about antibiotics, antipsychotic medications, They just cool the body down. The patient becomes heavy and they gain weight. This weight is nothing else but waste products and water. So they cool down, they become obese, and they start to develop mitochondrial dysfunction. For example, they feel cold and they will have digestive dysfunction, they catch infections, and their sex drive and other metabolic and hormonal processes will also slow down. So this was Antoine Bechamp, who was probably similar to Tesla. He was genius but less popular. He constructed his terrain theory, which said that the terrain is more important than the bacteria. The terrain meant acidity, lactate buildup, inactive metabolites, the Chinese called them dampness, both carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. This is waste and biofilm formation. And there is a subsequent sterile inflammation with histamine production. So basically, in the core of this whole process is mitochondrial dysfunction and lactate accumulation. This man was Louis Pasteur, who said that the bacterium is more important than the terrain itself. So, but what is about opportunistic pathogens? What makes them opportunistic? And unfortunately, Pasteur was more popular since the foundations of modern microbiology and antibiotic therapy, preventive therapy, which is supposed to teach the immune system, these industries rely heavily on his germ theory. These are the Koch postulates. Unfortunately, they seldom get fulfilled completely. First, the pathogen needs to be present in every case, and this pathogen needs to be isolated and detected in the infected person, and then this isolated pathogen needs to be brought forward and infect another susceptible person and produce the same symptoms. The pathogen needs to be isolated from the new infected person as well. So what is the common denominator? How can we reconcile the two theories? Obviously, a surgical wound must be sterile without pathogens because a sterile inflammation in the wound is inevitable. This sterile inflammation serves a reparative purpose, and it is usually there. Elsewhere, outside a surgical wound, there is always susceptibility, which will be the sterile inflammation. So let's talk about the Warburg shift. There are two types of Warburg shift depending on the mitochondria, whether they become impaired permanently or transiently. In the case of permanent mitochondrial impairment, it is called oncological Warburg shift, and this usually happens in a lot of cancers. However, immunological Warburg shift implies when mitochondria go down in a transient manner, and this happens when we generate an immunological response in a situation. So there is a transient mitochondrial weakness or blockade and lysosomal activation. This change gets reversed easily with intact and healthy mitochondria. Histamine is released upon this sterile inflammatory process, which may attract bacteria. This is called superinfection. So what is the solution? We can decrease susceptibility, and this is exactly what happens in alternative medicine. We use common inflammatory herbs such as Cutelaria and burdock. We also start digestion of this biofilm with, for example, chamomile, oregano and rosemary, and we support mitochondria. Herbs to support mitochondria are ginger, cinnamon, fenugreek, astragalus and ginseng. There are certain recipes and formulas which act as green herbal antibiotics. What are they any better than synthetic antibiotics, or could they provide any advantage? Synthetic antibiotics are usually single active ingredients, therefore resistance to them may be easily developed. Herbal antibiotics are, however, polyvalent, which means that there are multiple ingredients and therefore bacterial resistance are less likely to develop. They also cool inflammation, just like synthetic antibiotics, but herbal antibiotics also support mitochondria, and they also trigger an active digestion called autophagy. They may be particularly useful in the case of recurrent infections when there is a biofilm and this biofilm needs to be digested in order to prevent any further infection to happen. This book is about herbal antibiotics. Examples are honey, propolis, cabbage, ginger, astragalus, onion, garlic, oregano and rosemary. Chinese formulas, they are powerful and they are made from highly concentrated herbal powders. The combination or synergism is also important because the single ingredients cleverly support each other. These are the pros and cons of natural antibiotics and synthetics. The pros are, in the case of natural antibiotics, are multiple ingredients, less resistance, advantages in certain situations, for example, recurrent infections, and they usually have a good side effect profile, so they are better tolerated usually than synthetic antibiotics on the long term. They are highly accessible and usually cheap, and they are more sustainable than synthetic antibiotics. However, synthetic antibiotics are usually easy to be given intravenously and they may have a rapid onset. Natural antibiotics usually or may have some disadvantages as well. They may have drug interactions which we are not necessarily aware of, and we don't have experience in life-threatening situations. It doesn't mean that they don't work, it means that we don't have experience with them. Their slow onset may also be a problem, and the dosage is also a question. Synthetic antibiotics are single monovalent agents, therefore the resistance there can be very high. And what happens when we are allergic to some sort of synthetic antibiotics, like penicillin allergy? They have limited accessibility and the long-term tolerance is also a question. They are less sustainable than natural antibiotics and they are usually expensive. Here are some Chinese antibiotic formulas. Again, they support mitochondria, they give sulfate, to stabilize structured water. On the long term, for example, garlic is also a good source of sulfate. They stabilize mast cells, they have anti-inflammatory properties, and these antibiotic formulas may also digest biofilm. The Chinese call them dampness. Here are some evidence. For example, Shangfang Huo Mingjin and Huangdian Tang. Whoever is interested can look up online. This is a complex formula of Shangfang Huo Mingjin. We can see that these are complex formulas, and the herbs and medicinal agents have their own role in the formula, so they can synergistically support each other. Infectious diseases may also mean an emotional coping strategy. Usually worrying and overthinking, sympathy may exhaust bacteria, mitochondria. In its serious or severe form, it is called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Empathy and sorrow may work for children, or in case of children, they get ill if they don't want to go to school, or indeed they want to sympathize with other children, and they usually get their sadness and sorrow. They just simply want to be with their parents very often. So in this emotionally exhausting state, there is lack of energy, a little bit of lactate buildup, and the unfolded protein response, this waste product, waste accumulation starts, and waste builds up. The pathogen may simply help digest this waste, the biofilm, and here we need to talk about the importance of quality and loving human relationships. What is common in childhood diseases? They usually start as a flu and progress not usually overnight, so they just don't come out of the blue. Therefore, early intervention and treatment with herbal anti-inflammatories are important. And if mitochondria are not sick and not intoxicated, the patient may recover more quickly. What are we missing in intensive care medicine? I am an intensive care physician as well, therefore I had a chance to look at our current intensive care practice. So I was in a position to compare what the Chinese do in alternative medicine and what Western medicine does in intensive care. We don't support mitochondria. Sometimes you give steroids, but I think the picture is much more complex than simply giving steroids. Not reducing waste digestion either, autophagy, and not repairing membrane capacitance either. We can see that our Western type antibiotics are usually not selective to bacteria, but they act on the human body as well. For example, macrolide antibiotics affect human protein synthesis, not only the bacterial one. And ciprofloxacin, which is a fluoroquinolone type antibiotic, may block mammalian mitochondrial DNA replication as well, which means that DNA in the mitochondria become depleted and damaged. Therefore, mitochondria usually die in that situation. And we are talking about mammalian mitochondria, so human mitochondria, not bacterial. And this is the third example when clarithromycin is a mast cell stabilizer. So it means that it has anti-inflammatory properties on the human tissue as well. Gentamicin is said to be ear and kidney toxic, and the mechanism behind this toxicity may be its effect on mitochondria, because mitochondria may become weak or die in the inner ear and the kidneys, therefore imposing toxicity in the treated patient. What could be the solution? Regulate susceptibility. We have herbs with detergent-like action that they make membranes softer, and they reduce endoplasmic reticulum stress, which is basically the signal in the cell for inflammation. Ginseng, onion, garlic, licorice all have these herbal saponins. Support mitochondria. Ginseng, astragalus, licorice, cinnamon, and fenugreek all do have an effect, a positive effect on mitochondria. We can also induce biofilm digestion with herbs. Therefore, we can prevent recurrent microbial infections, because the permanent mitochondrial dysfunction and the subsequent biofilm formation and persistence may be behind these recurrent bacterial infections. We need to keep our body clean, which means that vegetarian diet, which is easy to digest, usually makes less biofilms. In summary, we can say that Bechamp has a place in our modern life, because we need to reduce susceptibility. There is no need to be afraid of harmful bacteria coming and jumping on us and just chewing on us. It is simply the question of susceptibility, and this susceptibility relies upon mitochondrial function and the amount of waste in our body. Pasteur germ theory needs to be interpreted correctly. Surgical wound, it needs to be sterile. There is no place for bacteria there. In this whole mission, I believe the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, or any sort of lifestyle medicine, may help us to a great extent. You can see the contacts here. If you liked my video and my presentation and you have any question, please feel free to contact me on these channels. Thank you very much for your attention.